We're here at the University of Florida Motorsports Forum to speak with professional race driver Marc Miller. Marc is a highly experienced professional. He's been in the sport for many years. He's driven every kind of car, starting with shifter karts, open wheel racers, sports cars at various levels for a number of different manufacturers and teams. And in races that are the highest profile in this particular sport, ranging from Sebring to the 24 hours at Daytona to the 24 hours at Le Mans, all of which he's led as a driver. So it's a pleasure to have you here, Marc. Welcome to the University of Florida.
Wow, thanks, Mike. You knew more about me than I remembered. That's great. Thank you.
So, given all the history you've been through, we don't have time to go through all of it. And what, for me, is the freshest is the fact that last year you were the champion in Trans Am in your class. And so I'd just love to hear about the success. Can you tell us a little about it?
Yeah, I'd love to share it. I mean, Trans Am is one of the oldest road racing series in the country. It's celebrated 53 years in 2019, which is just a very long time to be racing cars. And the foundation of Trans Am, really in the late 60s and early 70s, it bred a lot of professional, well-known racing drivers like Mark Donohue. Roger Penske came from Trans Am. Boris Said's Trans Am champion, Dorsey Schrader. There's just a long, long list of well-known racers, successful racers that have can claim that they're a champion. I started in Trans Am just in an exhibition race in '16. I did one race with Stevens Miller Racing, and just through keeping that personal connection, 2 years later I found that I had an opportunity to run some races with the team. It was a limited schedule, but we came out swinging in the first race and won the first race at Sebring in the opening round. And the next year, which was 2019, we made a concerted effort to really try to get this Dodge Challenger that we were trying to develop to be a title contender. And we built a new car, had great support. It comes down to having great support from the team, good support from your family, be able to devote the time and effort it takes to do it, and also great partnerships with our engine builders and our chassis manufacturer, and just all working together. We were able to score 4 wins, several podiums, I think 8 podiums in 12 races. We just a very strong season. Only 1 third-place finish. It was first or second most of the time, and very few issues with longevity or any mechanical failures. I think we only had 1 at Daytona at the very end of the season, but we had already locked up the championship, and it was a big honor because in 53 years, Dodge had never had a true title. And the class that I race is called TA2. It is very similar to the foundation. It was the Muscle Car Challenge. It was Ford Mustang, Chevy Camaro, Dodge Challengers. So that was kind of how Trans Am really kind of sprung on, is taking these production cars that everyone can see, all these muscle cars that you could buy off the showroom floor, and turn them into just ground-pounding racing machines. And some of the legendary drivers, Dan Gurney and Sam Posey, and these guys all kind of made a great race efforts in Trans Am. So for me, Trans Am, while the competitiveness is incredible and everything, it's not super physical to drive the cars, just because they have a lot. They're bigger and heavier, and they slide a little bit more. It's like old school racing. There's no traction control. There's no ABS. It's all you in the setup of the car, which I found was really raw and intuitive and non-technical. But the amount of effort to make the cars work, it allowed some ingenuity of how they did it in the 60s and 70s to trick the car into working a different way rather than re-engineer a full part, or to have someone plug into a computer and then adjust something. It's a completely different effort. And it was a true honor to be able to be listed among all the champions that have presided in Trans Am over the years, and to be part of that club now. And even more special for me was the fact that we did it in a Dodge, and we had opportunities to not do that. We could have switched at any time, and we kind of stood firm, and we're going to make this thing work. We're going to put a Hemi in the front. We're going to win races with it. We're going to win the championship with it, and we were able to accomplish that. But one of the biggest accomplishments out of it is all that work to put in, and all the engineering and all the tinkering that we could do in Trans Am that you really can't do in a lot of other series. I was nominated and awarded a Mark Donahue Technical Excellence Award for that, and that was, the championship was amazing because it's a worthwhile effort, but the championship is really owned by everybody. It's owned by the team, it's owned by the sponsors, it's owned by the families and the mechanics and myself. But that award is like pinpointed something that they saw, people, my competitors in the series and my own team saw that I was doing that really helped me stand out from everyone else. And that was one of the most amazing awards I could have received in my entire career.
That's a terrific story. So you mentioned that this was the first time Dodge had a championship, but Dodge is sort of part of the larger Chrysler Corporation, right?
Right.
And you had a history of running with other teams from Chrysler. You had some history with the Viper team, right?
Well, and that's why, yes, that's true. And the Dodge Viper program came back in 2012, I believe, is when they started to put a factory effort together. And my first experience with Dodge was in Canadian NASCAR. And when I raced in Canadian NASCAR, I raced a Dodge Intrepid one year, and then I raced a Dodge Charger the next year. And Mopar and Dodge in Canada were very involved in that Canadian NASCAR program, which ended up being bought out by NASCAR during the time I was there back in 2006, 5, and 6. So that kind of started my first type of experience in the Dodge family and Mopar. And fast forward several years later, I had raced predominantly Mazdas in sports car racing, and got an opportunity to test for the factory team and did fairly well. I wasn't selected to go be part of their factory Viper program for 2 years, but after the program kind of got pulled from manufacturer support, Ben Keating and Riley Motorsports continued on with the Viper because it was a very potent GT3 package. It was just a great GT car. And I got the opportunity to test because they were looking for a bronze-rated driver, and since I was unrated, I could potentially fit that role.
A sleeper.
Yeah, so it was kind of a sneaky way to do it, and went to a runoff, was able to drive the Viper again, competed at my first official GT race in 2015 at Laguna Seca in California, just leading up to the test at Le Mans, and was awarded a spot on the team at the 24 Hours of Le Mans for the first time. That was in a Dodge. And a year later, was able to race 3 races with that, not the same Dodge, but another Viper program, and ended with a win at Petit Le Mans, a 10-hour race at Road Atlanta with Jerome Bleekemolen and Ben Keating. And that was the farewell race for the Dodge Viper. It was no longer eligible in IMSA, and it was kind of fitting that it went out in a Dodge with the Dodge Viper. It went out with a win at one of the biggest endurance races in North America. And that same year was the first year I drove a Trans Am car, a TA2 car. And that was also a Dodge. It was a Dodge Challenger at the Detroit Grand Prix, which is my only home event. So I was kind of like, whether I liked it or not, the opportunities I was getting was in these products, was around this environment and with a certain amount of people from SRT, and had those connections, SRT and Mopar and Dodge. And there's something endearing to that, It's like, I had opportunities to, let's try a Mustang or let's try a Camaro, but emotionally it wasn't the same. So if we could do it in a Dodge, it'd be something no one else has done. Let's do that. And I like a challenge. I like that type of challenge. I've always been like root for the underdog type of person. I always felt like I was an underdog, even if I was on pole. for a race, even if I was the fastest in every practice, I always just felt like the underdog. I felt like I had to work real hard for it. So not afraid with a little bit of work, let's make this car better than everyone else. And that's what we ended up doing.
So you mentioned some of these longer races. You talked about the Road Atlanta race. You talked about Le Mans 24 hours.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about how that race affects you physically. What are the demands of an endurance race like that? I can't imagine being on track for 24 hours.
Typically in sports you gear up for the big game. You plan for the run. You plan for a mini marathon, and you have a training regimen that builds up to it. What we do in an endurance race, especially Le Mans is a perfect example, because it's 24 hours, but there's only 3 drivers. It's a maximum amount of 3 drivers, and you have to log a minimum amount of laps, or many hours. And there's a maximum amount you can stay at the car at any given time. So given the circuit, and it's such a long track, it's not uncommon that you can go out on a stint, what they call one fuel load is one stint, and to come in and do a double stint or sometimes a triple stint. And at night, it's easy to do a triple stint because it's cooler. You're not under as much stress. The tires don't wear as much because it's not as hot. And the lap times are very quick because it's making great power. But doing that, it's not actually during that stint at Le Mans because it's not a super physical race. You have a lot of cooling down time or relaxation time on the long straightaways. We're talking about an 8.5 mile track, and half of it is straightaways. It's very, very fast. But you have that ability to kind of bring your heart rate down, relax a little bit. It's a little bit less physically demanding than, let's say, Daytona, for instance. But the fatigue factor is really when you run your stint and then you can't relax after that, and you get out of the car, you're at Le Mans. It's the 24 hours of Le Mans. There's movies about this. This is like the pinnacle. There are race drivers that will never come here, that are championship winning drivers that will never get an opportunity. And I was lucky enough, my first 24-hour race, I got drafted to do this race. This is like a huge opportunity. But all that has to be gone when you get there. All that mentality has to change. So I think the story I got from Bill Riley, who's become a really good friend of mine, who gave me this opportunity along with Ben Keating, was the fact that there are drivers that will get to that track and mentally completely shut down because it's so big and they'll be nervous. And I just treated it like any other race. It was very cool, but it's just any other race. So after I got out of the car, I set myself a procedure. I had a little bit of food. I got a quick shower. I got down, laid down for 2 hours, woke up, and then you get into this cycle. So the hardest part is recovering from the stint because you lay it all out there. You put everything out in that 2 hours. Well, you've got to do it 6 more times, 5 or 6 more times in the next 20 hours. So you at that level of competition, you can't conserve either. It's not like you drive 80% for 5 stints. You drive 100% every lap, every corner for 5 stints. So when you leave it all out on the track, you have to be able to recover. So learning how to recover physically and mentally was probably the best thing that you can do. And you do a 24-hour race at Daytona, the physical needs are much different. It's a much smaller track, even though it's got a lot of straightaway and it's all banking, and you don't think, because you're not really turning the wheel on the banking, but the amount of load that you have down on your body, it limits blood flow, it limits physiologically, you're not able to recover. So that straightaway at Le Mans is so long you can recover, and you're stagnant, and you're not floating around, you're not under any load at all. At Daytona, the entire straightaway is banking. So you now you have all that load, and your recovery, you get tired faster, and you don't realize why, but that's one of the reasons why. And then you go, that little bit of relaxation you get on the banking, which isn't really that relaxing. Now you have 1.5 miles on the infield that you have to just drive like crazy to keep prototypes that are much faster cars behind you. At night, the lights are everywhere. You don't know if it's a competitor for in your class that's only, going the same speed as you, or a prototype that's been catching you for 4 laps that's way faster. You just don't know sometimes. So mentally it's draining, and there are times where it can get very heated because if there's loss of communication with the team and you let someone by and it's like, hey, wait, that guy's in my class. I've been fighting him off for 20 laps. And, I remember yelling and like, why did you guys not tell me that that was for position? Like, I let this guy go, and then I spent the next 10 laps trying to pass him back. And that just wears you out even more and puts you in a situation. But the spatial awareness and to have that information available, the more information available to you that you can process, it makes it easier to physically do the job. So a lot of that is having that recovery, being able to recover, being able to relax, being able to process things without it physically getting to you. And that's the difficult side of the 24-hour races, is all that recovery time when you leave it all out there and you have all this adrenaline built up. And I think, to a certain extent, there's other athletes that go through that. If you're in a tennis tournament in college and you play 4 matches in a day or 3, they go through that. It's a high intense, but their heart rate, it's short bursts of speed here and there. We're at for 1.5 to 2 hours, we're at a maximum aggression level, and then we're out.
So you've been really articulate about the importance of recovery in these endurance races, and about the mental challenges and the emotional challenges of dealing with all the stress. But you've also suggested that as drivers, there's also a strong physical demand on you that can be part of the profession. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. So the faster the car goes, typically when you think about cars like at Le Mans years ago, there was top speed of over 200 miles per hour, but the lap times were slower. It was just like, because the corner speeds were a lot lower. The faster the car is on the straightaway, the easier it is to generate the lap time physically on the driver. So as they have limited top speeds for safety, they've made cars have more aerodynamics, which creates more drag. So the same amount of power, it's harder for them to push that top speed. The cars have become way more capable in the corners. And what that means for the driver is just way more lateral and longitudinal G-forces against you that you have to fight, and sustained Gs. And where it becomes difficult, I think, it just depends on the class of car that you race. The slower the car, the less impact it is for you. There's certain levels of it as well, but the prototypes and Formula One cars have an immense amount of grip, mechanical grip and aerodynamic grip that creates a very difficult G load. So the athleticism of a driver at that level is even more pronounced. In GT cars, it's very helpful to have lower body core and lower body strength, just to maintain blood flow, to maintain good posture in the car. And then a very important thing is ergonomics in the car, to just take some of the stresses away from the driver. But it's very easy to fatigue. And the more you're fighting the car, the more you're trying to make the car do something that you want it to do that it's not really doing, the more fatigue you're getting lap after lap. And you can only sustain that for so long. Some people have a higher threshold from it. Some people have a lower threshold. It just depends on not just the physical side of it, but there is a mental side based on sustained heart rate. Higher heart rate uses up more energy versus being able to stay more relaxed. And I think it comes down to a combination of a little bit of everything for that, to the physical and mental and how it works together to really have the best performance in a car. I think you have to have strength in both. It's very easy for a driver in perfect physical shape to get very worn out very easily. And how is that possible if they're in great physical shape? and their stressors are no different than anyone else. It has to be related to the mental aspect of it.
Yeah. So given all the complications and the challenges behind the wheel on the track, how important is it when you're out of the car, you're off the track, the rest of your time as a professional, how important are the business aspects of being a race driver?
I think the business aspects of being a race driver for most racers, I think are just as important, if not more important. It's just you have to look at what the industry has become as far as not just a business, but also a hobby and entertainment. And a lot of the competitors that I race against or alongside are enthusiasts and that have the ability to also race cars and do this. And there's a lot of give and take when it comes to, business and physical performance. But for every racer that is running with a team that is operating with a strong corporate structure, or strong partnerships or sponsorships, the amount of work that that driver has to do to maintain those relationships becomes more important. If my team was funded by just a wealthy a business owner that liked to do it for fun, I would have no obligations for that. I would have no sponsor obligations. Uh-huh. My obligation would be to let that guy have the most fun he's ever had at every event that he comes to, which can also be a very taxing job. So you just never know, depends on the needs of that situation. It's just, does he like to go to dinner every night? Well, I probably should be in bed by 9, but if he wants to be out at 11 and he funds the program, it's no different than a media obligation that you have to do at 10 at night because that's the only time the schedule would allow it, or you have to be up for a photo shoot at 5 a.m. because the sun has to be in the perfect situation. I'm qualifying today, right? So it just comes down to there's that give and take and trade. And I had the great opportunity to work for a professional athlete, which really opened my eyes to a lot of this because I was able to compare my role as a professional athlete to his role as a professional baseball player. And there would not be one instant where they would have him on a game day show up and shake 100 people's hands and be there at 5 for a photo shoot, and then after the race, go up to a hospitality, or after a game, go up to a hospitality and entertain 100 guests, and it would not be even thought of to ask. In fact, it may be in his contract that is not allowed. Yeah. But that is the requirement for drivers. For a lot of the times, it's a requirement, especially when you have a partnership, sponsorship, media obligations to set, because those are the times that those people are there. That's when those fans are there. That's when the sponsors are there. They're not there on Wednesday, on setup day. Yeah. They're not there, they're not going to come out to a test day when no one's around and they don't see the fan interaction. They want to see it on that day of the event. And those obligations are there. So it's hard to balance that. And then you throw the IMSA, the series I race with regularly, and Trans Am even this year, or this past year, started doing it. They did a fan walk. So an hour before the race, let's stand in our suits in 95-degree weather, and we greet people and we talk about it. And forget about your nerves. Forget about how much fluid intake you should be bringing in. You have to manage that on your own. You may have a trainer standing there. You need to drink this. That's nice. You could have a PR person saying, he's not ready to talk right now. I think he's about to get in the car. That's also nice. But there's a lot of obligations, and I welcome them. I mean, if I can work at that level and bring, to be able to do all of those things and perform in the car, that's my goals. If that's what it takes to maintain relationships, to maintain success, to maintain professionalism in my sport as an athlete, and still perform in the car, how do I attain that? I don't agree that I should be limiting everything else just for this in-car performance, because honestly, if that's the case, then I don't get paid enough to do that anyway. So I feel like I need to be able to do all of it. And that's just how I looked at professional motorsports. It would be nice to not be like that. But I came from a fan perspective. I fell in love with motorsports with a passion. I wanted to do it. I wanted to be a professional because of I was that 12-year-old fan that wanted to go see that driver before they got in the car. And if I am going to be the guy that's to say, no, I can't talk to you, then who the hell am I to do that? I'm just completely eliminating one fan that eventually could be in my role, and I just don't agree with that. So I don't see that in every professional sport, and I don't see all athletes that do that. And even in motorsports, you don't have an athlete with that approach, but I'll be damned if I'm going to be that guy that's going to step on your foot to try to get away from you, that's going to not sign an autograph, that's not going to take a picture with you before I have to get into even the biggest race in the world, because that's the job. And if you start eliminating it, that's always been the job. Once the sport starts to eliminate those opportunities for the fans and the spectators, and definitely the sponsors and the marketing partners, then, at what point, what entertainment are you really creating? Yeah. Then it's just for the drivers. We can do that at an indoor go-kart race privately and have a blast.
Yeah.
There's a lot of times we have races, a lot of our, my pro driver friends, we've talked about going, we've done this before, the 25-hour Thunder Hill is a very long, well undocumented race in Northern California in the middle of winter, and there's a lot of pros that race in that, and it's the most fun because there's no pressure, and we don't sleep, we don't do through the procedure, we're just like normal club racing. It's why we fell in love with racing to begin with, and that some of us are just love that type of environment because it just reminds us of where we came from, and all the people that are willing to not sleep and stand out in the snow and the rain and eat, not good food for you, because they have this passion to do this race. And I just can't imagine going to that race and I need to get my 8 hours. It's not going to happen.
Mark, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you.
It's been a fascinating insight into the sport. I appreciate your openness, and it's just so inspiring. You've got to get someplace else on campus,
yes.
I know. So we've got to wrap this up, but thank you very much.
It's been my pleasure.
Thank you for being on Motorsports Forum. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
You bet.